In addition, we have, let's say this is the open office space, right? 60 feet wide. The elevator hoistway is behind us over here to my right. The air is going to come rushing down the elevator shaft through the doors somehow, and then into this open space. It's going to equalize in pressure. And if it busts any windows out, it might bust them all. Not these highly focalized, pinpoint accurate, violent ejections that occur almost exactly at the midpoints of the facade. And they're occurring 20, 40, and even 60 stories down below this zone of destruction.
Myth. This was a classic progressive collapse.
Well, how can it be classic if it's never happened, in fact, before in history, though they use this term? Was it progressive? Well, what we have, instead of seemingly a gravitational collapse, is the equal distribution of this material outside the perimeter of each of these twin towers in a 12 to 1,400 foot radius. In fact, well beyond the boundaries of ground zero. Look at the nice, neat pile associated with World Trade Center 7. An implosion, a classic implosion. That's happened before in history. A classic explosive implosion. Versus the incredible explosive event driving 9-ton perimeter wall units laterally at 60 miles an hour, instant speed out of the sides of the Twin Towers, landing well over 600 feet away.
Myth. There was a stack of pancaked floors at the bottom.
Do you see any? I don't. There's a story, there's a pile about 2 stories high of perimeter wall units, core columns, other debris. You know, there were over 110 floors in this building, each of them an acre in size. This is a massive building. This is the metal decking upon which the 4-inch thick reinforced concrete was placed. There's 220 acres of this material. It's missing. It's completely missing. And 10,000 floor trusses that supported this, as well as the concrete that we already talked about, 100-micron particle size scattered throughout lower Manhattan. We talked about the small metal filings that were found throughout all of that dust. Were those the missing floor deckings and floor trusses?
And remember that the steel and concrete below the fire was cold and hard. So it can't be explained by being burned up in the fire.
Where are the pancakes? In a traditional pancaking collapse, we're looking for pancakes, not unlike something like this. Probably 10, 20 stories high or even higher.
Myth. The towers look nothing like a controlled demolition.
You tell me what the towers might have looked like. What I see developing already in the lower left here is upward, outward, arching streamers. Geometry of fireworks almost in its symmetry. Compare that to the Tongan Sea volcanic eruption and this known controlled demolition with pyroclastic-like flows. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives?
Myth. The building tenants would have seen workers planting explosives.
Well, how would they have gotten into this building to plant explosives? Let's take the floor plan and enlarge the core area where we note that each of these elevators are in turn adjacent to the core columns and the beams in the building. So if you had access to those elevator shafts, you'd have access to the core columns and beams to plant those explosives. Of course, it would be much easier if you had the cover of an operation such as the largest elevator modernization going on in history the 9 months prior to 9/11. This is one of the reasons the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and the firefighters for 9/11 Truth are calling for an investigation of Ace Elevator, who had this contract replacing these elevator systems. They had 85 employees at the scene, and they were responsible for staying there and helping the firefighters rescue these victims. After all, this is traditional, and they are the experts in the delivery systems of those rescues. Isn't that true, Eric?
Yeah, it's true. We use security from the building and elevator. If the elevator people are there, they're definitely help. But we use security all the time in high-rise operations to have them show us where to go and what to do.
Myth. The columns significantly slowed the collapse.
Well, let's see how slow this collapse was.
Galileo's law of falling bodies calculates the time in which an object will travel a certain distance in complete free fall. Distance, d, equals 16.8 times time in seconds squared. The South Tower was 1,362 feet tall. 1362 equals 16.08 times 84.7, or 9.2 seconds.
Well, that's free fall. Let's see how fast it's coming down. 4 seconds. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free fall speed.
Wait a minute. What does this mean? Let's try to put this in some perspective. Let's take a 15-story section of building, just like the top 15 stories above the point of jet plane impacts in the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Hold it up with this giant crane, 95 stories over nothing but air. Next to it, the same identical building component. And this time, let's put it over 95 stories of World Trade Center building with 80,000 tons of structural steel in it, designed to resist that load. In fact, let's make it 5 times stronger than it needs to be to resist that load. Now, NIST tells us, basically, the official story, that when these cranes, the levers are pulled, these will pretty much hit the ground at the same time. How many of us think that is reasonable? No, this is 7th grade physics. We understand this intuitively. Something with resistance, particularly this much resistance, is going to slow that down significantly, if, in fact, it could ever begin at all. Now, what's the problem with this analogy? Where is the 15-story section that's supposed to be driving this building down? We're going to be looking for that. We'll be looking at that in just a moment. But it's not there. All of the photographs and videos show that it has, in fact, been destroyed. After that, it's the building tearing itself apart at 2/3 of free fall acceleration. Faster and faster and faster, straight down through the path of what was the greatest resistance.
Myth. The towers collapsed in a natural manner.
Well, let's see if that is true. Here is... These are a little bit out of order. Here is the building beginning to tip, which we would expect in the case of in the South Tower. It begins to tip, which we would expect. We would expect that angular momentum to continue. It's 22 degrees off of its axis. We have asymmetrical damage from the airplanes, asymmetrical damage from the fires, and now asymmetrical loading from this portion that's tipping. But watch what happens from below. Complete symmetry, like the firemen described, like bands of explosions wrapping all the way around the building. How is it even possible